The dawn light crept slowly over the jagged horizon of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, brushing the Pacific waves in hues of silver and gold. The air was sharp, cold, and heavy with anticipation. Rows of young men, muscular, grim, and barely awake, stood shoulder to shoulder on the wet sand, their breath rising in the morning mist. They were the newest class of Navy SEAL recruits, ready to face Hell Week, the legendary trial that would decide who among them had the strength to endure. Among them stood Sarah Langford. She was quiet, her posture straight, her eyes calm, eyes that had seen things most of these men could never imagine. Her sandy blonde hair was pulled tightly beneath her cap, her uniform unremarkable, her name tag small and plain. To anyone watching, she was simply another face in the lineup, another hopeful ready to be broken by 6 days of mud, pain, and sleepless nights. But that illusion was exactly what the Navy intended. Sarah wasn't here to become a SEAL. She already was one. Not just any SEAL Commander Sarah Langford, one of the few women ever to rise to that position. A legend whispered about in operations where names never reached public record. Her mission was simple: go undercover among the new recruits and evaluate their cohesion, morale, and adaptability under hidden supervision. Officially, she was Recruit Langford. In truth, she outranked everyone on that beach, except the base commander himself. The whistle blew. Down in the surf. Move. The instructor's voice was like a gunshot. Dozens of recruits sprinted forward, crashing into the freezing Pacific waters. The cold struck like 1,000 knives. Sarah followed, her body moving with instinctive precision, steady breathing, controlled pace. Around her, men cursed, gasped, and stumbled. One recruit fell, shivering uncontrollably. Without a second thought, Sarah reached out, grabbing him by his vest and pulling him upright. "Keep your knees high, Simmons," she said quietly. "Don't fight the water. Move with it." He nodded weakly, too cold to notice how she spoke with the steady authority of a leader. The instructors paced the shore like sharks. "You call that energy?" One bellowed. "You're not warriors. You're worms." Blake, a tall, broad-shouldered recruit with a smirk that could slice steel, shot Sarah a glance. "Better keep up, sweetheart," he muttered. "This ain't yoga class." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The next wave slammed into them, and she surged ahead, leaving him coughing behind. When they finally crawled out of the surf, coated in sand and salt, the men collapsed into push-ups on command. The instructors screamed, counting with military precision. Sarah's movements were flawless, elbows locked, rhythm perfect. Blake looked sideways, irritation flashing in his eyes. He wasn't used to being outperformed, especially not by someone he'd already decided was weak. By mid-morning, the recruits were drenched, shivering, and barely standing. Their bodies ached from hours of punishment, log carries, sprints, and water burpees that felt endless. Yet Sarah's face remained calm. She didn't seek attention, didn't boast. She just performed, precise, consistent, unstoppable. At lunch, the recruits sat in silence, eating rations in the open field. A few glanced her way. One, a quiet man named Ortiz, finally spoke. "Where'd you learn to handle the cold like that?" Sarah shrugged. "Grew up in Maine. Winters there make this look warm." Ortiz chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't talk much, do you?" "Talking doesn't get you through Hell Week," she said simply. From the command tent at the edge of the field, Captain Reeves, the base commander, watched her through binoculars. His assistant leaned in. "She's blending in perfectly, sir." Reeves nodded. "They haven't figured it out yet. Good. Let's see how long that lasts." That night, after nearly 20 hours of drills, the recruits were ordered to run a 5-mile endurance test along the shoreline, in total silence, carrying 50-pound packs. The wind howled, waves crashing beside them. Flashlights flickered through the fog. Halfway through, one of the smaller recruits, a 19-year-old fresh out of boot camp, tripped, twisting his ankle. He fell hard, crying out in pain. The formation slowed. Blake rolled his eyes. "Leave him," he barked. "He'll catch up or quit." Sarah stopped. "No," she said firmly. "Nobody gets left behind." She crouched beside the injured man, checking the joint quickly. "It's sprained, not broken." "Can you walk?" He nodded, gritting his teeth. "Good, you're not done yet." She slung his arm over her shoulder, carrying part of his weight as they continued. The others watched silently, conflicted between admiration and annoyance. When they finally crossed the finish line, the instructors noted her steady pace and unflinching endurance. Captain Reeves scribbled a note in his logbook. Langford, excellent field awareness. Leadership instinct emerging naturally. Hours later, in the barracks, the recruits collapsed onto their cots, too tired to speak. The air stank of sweat, seawater, and exhaustion. Sarah sat quietly at the edge of her bunk, cleaning her boots in silence. Her hands were raw, her eyes heavy, but her expression was steady. A soldier's composure, unbroken. Blake's voice cut through the dim light. "Hey, Langford," he said with a sneer. "You some kind of teacher's pet? You don't talk, you don't complain. You think that makes you tough?" Sarah looked up slowly. "No," she said softly. "It just means I don't waste my energy proving what I already know." A few recruits chuckled quietly. Blake scowled, turning away. Later that night, when the others were asleep, Sarah reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a small notebook, her mission log. The pages were damp, but she wrote neatly despite the dim light. Day 1. Observation complete. Cohesion low. Dominance culture evident. Subject Blake, strong but reckless. Ortiz, reliable potential leader. Overall morale, unstable. Recommendation, further stress testing required. She paused, listening to the soft breathing of the recruits. A faint smile crossed her lips. They had no idea. To them, she was just another name on the roster. But every step, every command, every reaction was feeding into her report, a real-time analysis of leadership under pressure. Before turning in, she looked out the small window beside her bunk. The moonlight danced over the dark waves of the Pacific. It reminded her of countless nights spent on covert operations, the silence before danger, the calm before chaos. Her mind wandered briefly to the day she'd been chosen for this mission. Reeves had stood in his office, arms crossed, his tone serious. "You sure you want to do this, Commander? These men won't treat you kindly. They'll see you as competition, or worse." Sarah had met his gaze without hesitation. "If they can't respect strength unless it looks like theirs," she said, "then that's exactly what I need to fix. Now." Watching the ocean again, she whispered to herself. Change never comes easy. Outside, the instructors prepared the next morning's drills, the infamous log carry marathon. It would break the weak and harden the rest. Inside the barracks, the men slept restlessly, unaware that their recruit was the one person who could command every instructor on the base with a single order. And as the first whistle of day 2 screamed through the night air, Sarah Langford was already awake, boots laced, eyes steady, ready for the real test to begin. The second day started before dawn, though it felt as if the recruits had never actually slept. The barracks echoed with the metallic clatter of boots and the hoarse shouts of instructors. Cold air seeped through the cracks, biting skin and lungs alike. Sarah Langford was already awake, standing perfectly still beside her bunk while the others scrambled. She'd spent the last hour stretching silently in the dark, calming her mind. To her, exhaustion was a familiar adversary, a ghost she'd learned to ignore long ago. The door burst open. Outside, now. The recruits poured into the courtyard, forming lines under the pale morning sky. The air smelled of salt and steel. Across from them stood Chief Instructor Miller, a man whose face looked carved from stone. "Welcome to day 2 of your personal nightmare," he growled. "You're going to wish you'd never heard the words Navy SEAL." The men groaned softly. Sarah said nothing. "First event, log PT?" Miller barked. "You'll carry those logs over there for the next 2 hours. Nobody drops it. Nobody quits. You drop it. You start over." The teams rushed to grab their logs, massive wooden cylinders slick with dew and sand. Each weighed over 200 pounds. Sarah ended up with Blake, Ortiz, and 3 others. The look on Blake's face said everything. Great, stuck with her again. "Ready?" Miller shouted. "Lift!" The recruits strained. The logs rose shakily into the air. The weight crushed shoulders and bent spines. Within seconds, grunts and curses filled the beach. Sand shifted beneath their boots. Sarah steadied her breath. Her movements were precise, controlled strength rather than brute force. She adjusted her grip subtly, balancing the team's rhythm. "Left side, tighten up," she murmured. Blake glared at her. "I'll give the orders." She ignored him, focusing instead on the 2 struggling men near the end. "Step together," she called. "One motion. Don't fight the log, move with it." The difference was immediate. The team's rhythm improved. The log stopped wobbling. Even Blake couldn't deny it. After 20 minutes, the pain set in. Muscles burned. Arms shook. Miller paced alongside them like a predator, watching for weakness. "Team 3, you call that coordination? My grandmother could carry that faster." Blake snarled, his pride stung. "Pick it up. Move, move, move." They charged forward, boots digging into the sand. Sarah felt the strain, but never faltered. Sweat ran down her temples, stinging her eyes. One man stumbled, dropping his end. The log crashed into the sand. Miller's whistle screamed. "Down. Everyone down. Push-ups until I'm bored." They dropped instantly, pumping their bodies into the dirt. Blake glared at the fallen recruit. "You trying to get us killed?" Sarah's voice cut through. Calm but firm. "He's dehydrated. Someone get him water." Blake turned on her. "He needs discipline, not pity." Sarah met his eyes evenly. "Discipline doesn't mean ignoring weakness. It means fixing it before it kills someone." Blake opened his mouth, but shut it again. Something in her tone, steady, almost commanding, stopped him cold. By the end of the drill, every muscle screamed for mercy. Miller blew his whistle again. "Form up." The recruits staggered into line, coated in sweat and sand. Miller smirked. "Now that you've had your morning massage, time for a little swim." Groans erupted. 2 miles. He shouted. Full gear. They ran toward the waves, diving into the frigid Pacific. The shock was immediate, cold so intense it stole breath and thought. Some recruits gasped. Others screamed. Sarah moved like a machine, her strokes powerful and deliberate. Blake tried to race her, splashing furiously beside her. Halfway through, his rhythm broke, and exhaustion began to pull him down. Sarah noticed, then deliberately slowed, keeping pace near him. "You're burning out," she said, not unkindly. "Pace your breathing. Don't tell me." "What to?" He coughed, swallowed salt water. She grabbed his arm, keeping him steady. "Relax," she ordered. "Breathe." He obeyed without realizing it. Together, they reached the buoy. When they stumbled back onto the beach, Miller's whistle screamed again. "Halfway done, ladies. Let's see what's left of you." The afternoon brought obstacle courses, low crawls, rope climbs, and endless sprints. The sun blazed, turning the sand into fire beneath their boots. Recruits began dropping. Dehydration, cramps, sheer exhaustion. Through it all, Sarah remained calm, steady, unstoppable. Her body moved like it had done this 1,000 times before, because it had. Every motion was memory. Every breath, precision. By the final challenge, a 50-pound pack run across the dunes, even Ortiz looked ready to collapse. He panted beside her. How? How are you still upright? Sarah gave a faint smile. Pain is information. I just choose not to listen. Blake, overhearing, shook his head. You're not human, Langford. Neither are you, she replied. Not yet. But you could be. He didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. As dusk fell, the recruits stumbled into the mess hall for dinner. Every muscle trembled, every face hollow. Most fell silent, too tired even to talk. Sarah sat quietly at the end of the table, eating with methodical calm. Across the room, Captain Reeves and Chief Miller observed from a distance. She's holding back, Miller muttered. Reeves nodded. She's not here to dominate. She's here to learn them, how they break, how they lead. Miller smirked. Blake's gonna have a rude awakening when this is over. Reeves chuckled. That's the point. Later that night, the recruits trudged back to the barracks. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, drumming against the metal roof. The storm outside matched the storm inside. Exhaustion, ego, doubt. Blake sat on his bunk, rubbing his sore arms. He looked at Sarah, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, patching a tear in her sleeve. You actually enjoy this? He asked, half sarcastic. She looked up. Enjoy isn't the word. Necessary is? He frowned. Necessary for what? For finding out who you are when everything's taken away. He studied her for a moment. There was something in her eyes, not defiance, not pride, but clarity. It unsettled him. When the lights went out, Sarah stayed awake. She opened her mission notebook again, writing in neat, efficient script. Day 2. Physical performance, above standard. Blake displays natural authority, but lacks empathy. Ortiz improving under pressure. Group morale rising. Team beginning to mirror leadership energy, unaware of true evaluation purpose. She paused, then added, personal note, emotional control remains intact. Physical strain manageable. Recommend maintaining current pace. She closed the notebook and lay back on her bunk, listening to the rain. Her mind drifted to the early days of her career, back when she was the one being tested. The cold, the fear, the relentless scrutiny. She remembered the sneers, the whispered comments. She won't last. But she had lasted. She had endured, not for pride, but for something deeper, the belief that leadership was more than shouting orders. It was about being calm in chaos, steady in fear. The sound of distant thunder rolled across the coast. Sarah turned toward the window. Outside, lightning flashed over the waves, illuminating the beach where the next day's trials would begin again. She knew the coming days would be harder. The instructors would push them past their limits, physically, mentally, psychologically. But that was the purpose. Only when the mask of confidence cracked did true character appear. For her, the challenge wasn't the training. It was restraint. The need to hide her instinct to lead, to correct, to command. Every time she bit back an order, she reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't training to be better. She was here to make them better. In the silence, a faint sound caught her ear, someone sobbing quietly in the dark. A young recruit, barely 20, buried his face in his pillow. Sarah didn't move or speak, but her heart tightened. She remembered that feeling, the loneliness, the fear of failure. She turned her gaze back to the ceiling, whispering softly, too low for anyone to hear. "Hold on, kid. The storm always feels worst before the dawn." Outside, the Pacific wind howled. The rain hammered harder, washing away the footprints from the day's drills. Tomorrow would bring new pain, new tests, and more revelations. And somewhere deep within the ranks of exhausted men, one quiet woman continued her mission, unseen, unrecognized, but in absolute control of everything happening around her. The trials had only just begun. By the third day, the recruits looked like ghosts. Faces hollowed by exhaustion, eyes red from lack of sleep, hands blistered and swollen. The once confident chatter had vanished. Now, only the sound of waves and barking commands filled the air. Hell Week had begun to earn its name. The morning started with surf torture, a cruel but legendary exercise. The recruits lay shoulder to shoulder in the icy Pacific, arms linked, waves crashing over their heads. The instructors paced behind them, shouting, "Get comfortable, gentlemen. The ocean is your new home." Sarah lay in the middle of the line, salt stinging her skin. The cold crept into her bones, but she kept her breathing steady. Around her, men trembled, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Some cried out. Others whispered curses into the wind. To Sarah, this was familiar, not the pain, but the mindset. The moment when most began to lose themselves. Hell Week wasn't about physical endurance. It was about the collapse of ego. The instructors wanted to break identity, strip them down until only raw will remained. A recruit 2 spaces away started to shake violently. I can't," he gasped. Sarah turned her head slightly. "Breathe," she said. "Slowly. Don't fight the water. Let it wash through." He tried, but the next wave hit, swallowing his words. Seconds later, he raised his hand, the signal to quit. 2 instructors rushed forward, dragging him out. The bell rang once from the shore. Clang. The sound every recruit feared most. One more gone. By the time the group was allowed to stand, 5 men had quit. The rest staggered toward the shore, shivering. Sarah moved among them silently, helping lift one man who could barely stand. "Appreciate it," he mumbled. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We're only halfway." The instructors ordered them back into formation. "Congratulations," Chief Miller shouted. "You've survived breakfast. Now let's see if you can make it to lunch." Next came team drills, carrying rafts over their heads while sprinting across the beach. The boats were heavy, awkward, and soaked with water. The recruits groaned as they lifted them. "Team 2, move." Sarah's team hoisted their raft. The sun burned overhead now, the cold of the ocean replaced by blistering heat. Sand stuck to their skin, turning sweat into grit. Blake, once confident, was losing patience. "Come on, pick it up," he barked. Ortiz stumbled. "It's 2. Don't talk, move." Blake snapped. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Ease the front angle. You're pulling too far right." Blake glared at her. "You giving orders now?" "Just trying to keep us upright," she replied calmly. "Save it," he spat. "You're here to follow, not command." She said nothing, but she shifted her grip subtly, balancing the raft herself. Within seconds, the wobble steadied, proof that her adjustment worked. The team noticed. Blake noticed too, and it only made him angrier. Half an hour later, the exhaustion reached a peak. The instructors blew the whistle, calling for a combat scenario. The recruits had to race inland, retrieve a dummy casualty, and bring it back, all while under simulated gunfire from paintball rifles. Go, go, go. They sprinted up the dunes. Adrenaline surged through the fatigue. Blake took point, shouting commands. Sarah followed closely, scanning the terrain automatically, a professional instinct she had to suppress. Paintballs whizzed through the air. Ortiz ducked behind a dune, breathing hard. "We're pinned," Blake shouted. "Move left. Get the dummy." "No cover," Sarah said sharply. "You'll lose 2 men before you reach it." Blake rounded on her. "You questioning my orders?" "I'm keeping your team alive," she said, eyes locked on his. For a moment, they stared at each other. Exhaustion, ego, and truth colliding in the scorching air. Then a burst of paintballs peppered the sand near their feet. Blake flinched. "Fine," he hissed. "You got a better plan?" Sarah pointed. 2 flank left. 1 gives covering fire. Moving pairs, not singles. I'll draw attention." Before he could argue, she was already moving, sprinting low across the sand, drawing the enemy fire toward her. Paintballs snapped past her shoulders, one striking her pack, another grazing her helmet. She dove behind the dummy and waved the team forward. They moved exactly as she directed, quick, tight, efficient. Within minutes, they retrieved the dummy and fell back to cover. The exercise ended with the whistle's sharp blast. The instructors called them in. Chief Miller looked over his clipboard, his voice dry but amused. "Team 2, fastest completion time. Who took command?" Blake started to speak, but Ortiz interrupted. "Langford, sir." Miller raised an eyebrow. "That so?" Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead. "Team effort, Chief." Miller smirked. "Of course it was." He moved on. Blake shot her a look that could have killed. Later, as they dragged their packs back toward the barracks, he muttered, "You think you're smarter than me, don't you?" "No," she said. "Just less tired." He scoffed. "You've got jokes now." She glanced at him. "Blake, if you spent less time proving you're in charge, you might actually lead." That hit harder than she intended. He didn't respond. By evening, the team was barely standing. During chow, no one spoke. The air was thick with tension. Part respect, part resentment. Sarah sat quietly, eating in measured bites, her movements efficient even in exhaustion. After dinner, the recruits were given a 30-minute break, a luxury in Hell Week. Most used it to collapse in the sand. Sarah walked to the edge of the pier instead, staring at the horizon. The sunset bled orange into purple, waves glittering beneath it. Captain Reeves joined her silently. "You're pushing them," he said. "They're pushing themselves," she replied. "Blake's going to crack soon," Reeves said. "He's too used to being the strongest man in the room." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly why he's here." Reeves studied her profile. Calm, unreadable. "And you? You holding up?" She gave a faint smile. "This isn't the hardest week I've had, sir." He chuckled quietly. "I believe that." When he left, she stood there a little longer, the salt air stinging her face. She thought of all the times she'd been underestimated, all the times she'd been told to step aside, to let the men handle it. The irony wasn't lost on her now. Standing here disguised among them, silently running the whole show. Back in the barracks that night, the atmosphere was heavy. Blisters were being popped, bandages wrapped, sighs filling the silence. Blake sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. Ortiz nudged him. "You were rough on her today." "She doesn't know her place," Blake muttered. Ortiz snorted. "Maybe she knows it better than you do." Blake glared. "Watch it, or what?" Ortiz shot back. "You'll yell at me too?" Before it could escalate, Sarah spoke from her bunk. "Enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Both men froze. She stood, crossing her arms. "You think yelling makes you strong? You think rank means leadership? Out there, it doesn't matter who talks louder. It matters who keeps the team alive. The room was silent. Then she sat back down, calmly tying her boots for the next drill. Blake stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew she was right. Hours later, when the instructors burst in for another midnight exercise, the recruits scrambled in panic. But for the first time, Team 2 moved as one, tighter, faster, sharper. And though no one said it, everyone followed Sarah's lead. Hell Week was breaking them, yes, but it was also building something stronger beneath the pain. And as dawn crept over the waves once more, one truth was becoming clear to every man in that barracks. The quiet recruit wasn't ordinary. She was something else entirely. The ocean was a black mirror that morning, silent, endless, and cold enough to bite through the thickest wetsuit. The recruits stood on the deck of a small Navy training vessel, watching the sun creep over the horizon. The light barely touched the waves, which seemed to stretch forever. "All right, meatheads?" Chief Miller barked. "Welcome to your next nightmare, the drown-proof drill." A collective groan rippled through the group. Everyone had heard stories. Recruits blacking out underwater, instructors shouting from above, panic setting in faster than thought. "Pair up," Miller ordered. "You'll secure your partner's hands and feet with rope. You'll both hit the water. Stay calm, stay alive, and wait for extraction. You panic, you fail. You fail, you quit. Understood?" "Yes, Chief," they shouted in unison. Sarah scanned the group quietly. Her breathing was slow, steady, her mind already calculating. She'd done this drill a dozen times before, but today she had to pretend it was new. Pretend she was terrified like the others. She was paired with Blake. The irony didn't escape her. The man who doubted her most would now trust her to keep him alive underwater. They stepped up to the rail together. "Don't screw this up," Blake muttered, tying the rope around her wrists. "I'll try not to drown before you," she replied dryly. He scowled but said nothing. "On my mark." Miller's voice cut through the wind. 3, 2, 1, jump. They hit the water hard. The impact stunned them, the cold stealing their breath instantly. As they sank, the light above dimmed into shifting blue shadows. Sarah's instincts kicked in. Stay calm, conserve air, control the panic. Beside her, Blake was struggling. His movements were too fast, thrashing slightly as he tried to adjust to the bindings. Air bubbles escaped from his nose in frantic bursts. She turned her head toward him. "Slow down," her eyes said. "Breathe." He tried, but she could see it, that creeping terror that grips when lungs start to burn. Then came the next phase. The instructors above threw a weighted line into the water, a signal. The recruits had to retrieve it with their teeth and bring it back, still bound. Blake's eyes widened. His body jerked in panic. He started to ascend too fast. Sarah acted without thinking. She twisted her body, kicking toward him, and used her shoulder to block his path upward. His eyes met hers, angry, desperate. She shook her head once. "Don't." He glared at her, bubbles streaming from his mouth. Then his head snapped back, the early sign of oxygen panic. Sarah reacted instantly. With precise movements, she reached behind her, slipped the knot on her wrist using the pressure trick she'd perfected years ago. A move no recruit should have known. In seconds, her hands were free. She grabbed Blake's chin, forcing his eyes on hers, then untied his binding swiftly. He was limp now, barely conscious. She wrapped an arm around him and kicked upward. Her legs burned. The pressure built in her chest. The surface seemed miles away. When they finally broke through the water, the instructors on deck shouted, "Man down! Pull them in!" Sarah held Blake's head above the water, shouting, "He's fine. Just unconscious. Get the medic ready." They dragged both of them aboard. Sarah rolled him onto his side, forcing water from his lungs. He coughed violently, gasping for air. The medics rushed in, but she waved them back. "He's breathing," she said firmly. Chief Miller crouched beside her, his eyes narrowed. "That was quick thinking, Langford." "Maybe too quick." She met his gaze steadily. "You'd rather I let him drown?" Miller studied her for a long moment, then smirked. "No, ma'am." He stood and called out to the others. "Langford just saved your teammate. The rest of you learned something." The recruits erupted in murmurs. Some looked impressed, others suspicious. As the group recovered, Blake sat on the deck, still coughing. When he finally caught his breath, he turned to her. His voice was hoarse. "How the hell did you do that?" "I got lucky," she said simply. "Don't lie to me," he rasped. "You slipped your bindings." "No one can do that." Sarah didn't answer. She just looked out at the horizon. Later that evening, during chow, the rumors started spreading fast. "She's not just a recruit," Ortiz whispered. "Did you see how she moved?" "Yeah," another replied. Miller looked at her like he already knew something. Blake sat apart from them, silent, watching her. After dinner, the recruits were sent on a navigation exercise through the coastal marsh. No lights, no maps, just instinct and teamwork. "Remember," Chief Miller said, "you're being watched. You fail to work as a unit, you're done." The recruits trudged into the swamp, boots sinking into the mud. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. They followed Blake's lead until they got lost. "This can't be right," Ortiz muttered, checking the compass. "We've been circling for 20 minutes. Blake gritted his teeth. "We're fine. Keep moving." Sarah spoke up quietly. "We passed that fallen log 3 times. You're off by 20 degrees. Don't start again," Blake snapped. She sighed. "Fine, you lead us in circles." They moved another 10 minutes before hitting a dead end, a flooded trench too wide to cross. "Damn it." Blake kicked the mud. Sarah stepped forward. "Let me try." He hesitated, then gestured for her to go ahead. She crouched, studying the terrain. The wind direction, the slope of the reeds, the faint reflection of moonlight on distant water, all clues. She pointed left. "That way. There's a shallow crossing and high ground. You'll see the extraction lights from there." Blake frowned. "How do you know?" She looked at him evenly. "Because I've been here before." The group followed. And sure enough, within minutes they found the shallow crossing and the lights glimmering through the trees. No one said a word, but the respect in their eyes was unmistakable. When they reached camp, Chief Miller was waiting. "Well done, Team 2. Fastest navigation time of the night. Guess your new navigator knows her stuff." A few recruits glanced at Sarah. Blake didn't. As the others drifted off to their bunks, Blake lingered by the fire, his face lit by the flickering glow. When Sarah walked by, he said quietly, "You're not just some recruit, are you?" She paused. "What makes you think that?" He stared at her for a long moment. "Because when I was dying underwater, you didn't hesitate. You didn't even look scared." She gave a faint, unreadable smile. "Fear's a luxury, one I can't afford." Then she walked away, leaving him with that thought. That night, Blake couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face underwater, calm, unshaken, professional. The image burned into his mind. For the first time since training began, his arrogance wavered. And as the night deepened and the wind howled over the coast, one truth began to settle in his heart. a truth he couldn't yet admit aloud. Langford wasn't someone to underestimate. She was someone to follow. The morning air was thick with the smell of gun oil and wet sand. The recruits stood in line at the firing range, helmets strapped, rifles slung across their chests. It was the beginning of the combat simulation day, a grueling, 12-hour sequence of live-fire exercises meant to test not only accuracy, but control under chaos. Chief Miller paced before them, his boots crunching on gravel. Today you'll learn what happens when the line between training and war disappears. This is no drill, recruits. You freeze, you die. You shoot wrong. You fail. Clear? Yes, Chief. The line thundered back. Sarah adjusted her rifle strap, eyes scanning the mock village ahead, plywood walls, sandbag barriers, and metal targets painted in hostile red. The scenario would simulate a rescue operation under fire. She'd run this exercise countless times, but never as a recruit. Never under the eyes of men who believed she was one of them. The instructors gave the signal. Smoke canisters hissed, filling the air with white fog. Gunfire erupted, live rounds whizzing overhead, striking targets with metallic clinks. "Move! Move!" Blake shouted, leading Team 2 into the first alley. Sarah followed, her movements precise, controlled. She cleared corners with quick glances, her rifle steady despite the chaos. Ortiz fired at a target ahead, missing by inches. "Slow your breath," Sarah said, stepping behind him. "Exhale on the trigger." He tried again. This time, the round hit dead center. He shot her a grateful look, but she was already moving ahead. They reached the hostage zone, a cinder block room guarded by mechanical targets that popped up randomly, mimicking enemy fire. The team spread out, forming a defensive perimeter. Then something went wrong. A flash erupted from the second-story window, followed by a deafening explosion. The shockwave knocked several recruits to the ground. Smoke and debris filled the air. "Contact! Contact!" Blake yelled. But this wasn't part of the simulation. The detonation was too strong, real, not controlled. A live explosive had gone off where none should have been. Panic rippled through the recruits. "We've got injuries." Ortiz shouted. "Reeves is hit." Blood soaked through the instructor's pant leg. He'd been monitoring the exercise from behind a barricade. Now he was down. "Cease fire." Chief Miller's voice crackled through the radio. "Everyone, hold positions. Secure the perimeter." But confusion spread. Some recruits froze. Others kept firing, thinking it was still a test. Sarah's instincts took over. She dropped behind a wall, assessing. Smoke, shrapnel, screaming, visibility almost zero. She scanned the second-story window, caught a glint of metal. Someone was up there. She turned to Blake. "Take Ortiz and cover that flank." He blinked. "What?" "Who put you in?" She cut him off sharply. "Do it now." Something in her tone, crisp, commanding, absolute, made him obey without thinking. She moved fast, crawling through the rubble toward Reeves. Blood pulsed from his thigh. She tore open his medkit, applied pressure, and wrapped a tourniquet with practiced speed. "You're gonna be fine," she muttered. Reeves grimaced. "Langford. That blast?" "It wasn't, I know," she said. Another burst of gunfire crackled overhead. The recruits ducked. Sarah looked up, saw the faint silhouette of a man on the upper floor, holding what looked like an unauthorized weapon. Someone had sabotaged the drill. Without hesitation, she grabbed Reeves' radio. "Command, this is Langford. We have a live hostile in the training village. Request immediate lockdown." Static, no response. She cursed under her breath. The blast must have knocked out the comms relay. "Ortiz, Blake!" she shouted. "With me?" They sprinted across the courtyard, bullets striking the dirt around them. Sarah moved like a ghost, fluid, deliberate. She reached the stairs, signaled for them to stack up, and reached the door in one motion. Inside, the air was dense with smoke and cordite. The figure turned, a masked man in civilian fatigues. Not one of theirs. He raised the weapon. Sarah didn't hesitate. 3 shots, clean, precise. The man crumpled instantly. Silence followed, thick and unreal. Blake lowered his rifle, eyes wide. You didn't even clear the room," she said, ignoring him. They did. No more hostiles. Only the echo of gunfire fading outside. Sarah knelt beside the downed man and pulled off the mask. His face was pale, unfamiliar. Not a Navy trainee, not even military. Who the hell is he? Ortiz muttered. Sarah didn't answer. Her focus shifted to the explosive residue near the window, the markings, the type of wiring. It was professional. Someone had deliberately planted it. When the instructors finally stormed in minutes later, Miller froze at the scene. The unconscious man, the injured officer, the steady calm of the recruit who had just taken control of the chaos. What the hell happened here? He demanded. Sarah stood, her expression unreadable. Sabotage. 1 hostile neutralized. 2 minor injuries. 1 critical but stable. The team held the perimeter. Miller stared at her. You did all that? Yes, Chief. He studied her for a long, silent beat, then said, You're not just a recruit, are you? The words hung in the air like a blade. Before Sarah could respond, Reeves, still pale from blood loss, managed a weak grin. Told you she wasn't ordinary, Chief. The medics loaded him onto a stretcher, and the rest of the recruits stood watching as he was carried away. Sarah turned toward them, her face calm, but her pulse racing. Blake finally found his voice. You took down a hostile, patched up a man, and called in command like you've done this 100 times. Who are you? She looked at him, at all of them. Someone who's been where you're trying to go. The silence deepened. Even Miller said nothing this time. When the chaos settled and night fell over the base, the recruits sat around the barracks, restless and shaken. Ortiz whispered, Did you see how she moved? Like she'd done this before. Blake stared into the dim light. She has. Sarah sat alone at the far end, her gear cleaned and packed neatly beside her bunk. Her expression was blank, but inside, her mind raced. The sabotage had been no accident. It was a test. Someone wanted to see how far she'd go before revealing herself. She wasn't just training recruits. She was being watched. Outside, Chief Miller met with Captain Reeves in the infirmary. She blew her cover today, Miller said quietly. Reeves nodded weakly. It was bound to happen. You sure this was the right call? Reeves exhaled. They need to know what real leadership looks like. She just gave them that. Miller smirked. Then tomorrow's going to be interesting. Back in the barracks, the lights flickered out one by one. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The truth was unraveling faster than she'd planned. And as the sound of the ocean filled the night, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no turning back now. By dawn, her secret would no longer be rumor. It would be revealed. Dawn broke over the coast like a bruise, deep purple fading into a pale, uncertain gold. The base was unusually silent. No morning whistles, no shouted orders, no metallic clang of rifles being assembled. Just the soft rhythm of waves slapping the pier. The recruits sensed it immediately. Something was different. Chief Miller's voice cut through the quiet as they assembled. Listen up. Today's your final composite drill. The ambush simulation. You'll be dropped 2 miles inland. Your mission: rescue hostages and exfil to the coastline. Live rounds. Real-time pressure. You're being watched. He let that last word hang ominously. Watched. It wasn't just the usual supervision. Everyone knew it. Sarah stood in the formation, face unreadable. She could feel the shift in energy. After yesterday's chaos, the base felt tense, too quiet. She knew the instructors had reviewed every second of footage from the sabotage. And she knew, deep down, that her cover was seconds from breaking. But she wasn't here to hide anymore. She was here to lead. Blake kept glancing at her. His face was tight, his eyes uncertain. The man who once mocked her now looked at her like she was a riddle he couldn't solve. Miller's voice barked again. Team 2, you're first up. Move out. The helicopter ride was loud, the air whipping through the cabin. The recruits sat in silence, checking gear, tightening straps. Sarah stared out the open side door, the terrain below rolling by in patches of forest and sand. Blake leaned closer. I need to know, he said over the roar of the rotors. Who are you really? She met his eyes. You'll know when it's time. He frowned. That's not good enough anymore. She gave a faint, almost sad smile. It has to be. The helicopter dipped low. The light flashed green. Go. They jumped, parachutes opening in perfect sequence. The air howled past them, then snapped into silence as the chutes deployed. Within minutes, they hit the ground, regrouped, and moved through the underbrush. The mission began smoothly. They advanced in formation, clearing sectors, watching angles. But the air carried an unease, a weight that pressed harder than the gear on their backs. As they entered a narrow ravine, Sarah's instincts prickled. Something was off. No birds, no wind. Just silence. Stop, she whispered. Blake turned. What's wrong? She crouched, scanning the rock ledges. We're being funneled. Before he could respond, boom. An explosion tore through the left flank. Smoke and dirt blasted upward. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Ambush! Someone shouted. Chaos exploded. Recruits dove for cover, returning fire blindly. The radio crackled with static, jammed. Fall back. Blake yelled. We need to move. No, Sarah snapped. That's what they want. He glared at her. Then what? She scanned the ridge, reading patterns in the muzzle flashes, trained spacing, timed volleys. Not random. These aren't automated targets. Those are real shooters. Real? Blake repeated. This is a drill. Sarah's stomach dropped. Unless it isn't. Then she heard it. A different gunshot, sharper, deliberate. Not training ammo. Live rounds. Real threat. She grabbed Blake's shoulder. Get them behind cover. I'll draw fire. He grabbed her arm. You'll get yourself killed. She looked him straight in the eyes. Not today. Before he could stop her, she sprinted into the open, rolling behind a rock outcrop and returning controlled bursts of fire. Each shot hit precisely, cutting through the smoke, silencing muzzle flashes one by one. The men watched in disbelief. Her stance, her composure, every move screamed operator, not recruit. Ortiz whispered, She's not one of us, man. She's something else. Within minutes, the ambush was neutralized. 3 unknown assailants lay disarmed at the ridge's edge, instructors flooding in from the perimeter. Sirens blared. Chief Miller strode through the smoke, furious. What the hell happened out here? Sarah stood in front of him, weapon lowered, helmet still on. Her voice was calm. The exercise was compromised. Hostile agents infiltrated the range. The team held formation and survived. Miller's jaw tightened. And how would a recruit know that? The silence that followed was electric. Every man turned toward her. She reached up slowly and removed her helmet. Sweat matted her hair, dirt streaked across her face, but her eyes burned clear and unshaken. "I'm not just a recruit," she said. Miller stepped closer. "Then who are you, Langford?" She took a breath. For the first time since the program began, she spoke without restraint. "Commander Sarah Langford, U.S. Navy SEAL Team 7. I was assigned to this program to evaluate leadership readiness under live stress. The sabotage yesterday was part of a classified assessment. Today's ambush was not." Gasps rippled through the team. Ortiz's jaw dropped. Blake just stared at her, speechless. "You?" he started, but couldn't finish. Miller's face softened, not surprise, but confirmation. "So the mask finally comes off." Sarah nodded slightly. "You wanted to see how they'd react when leadership came from where they least expected." He turned to the recruits. "Well, gentlemen, surprise. Your so-called rookie has been running circles around you since day one." The group was silent. The revelation hit them like a blast wave. The woman they'd laughed at, argued with, doubted, had been their commanding officer all along. Blake looked stunned. "You deceived us." "I tested you," she said. "That's the same thing." "No," she said firmly. "If I'd told you on day one who I was, you'd have performed differently. You'd have obeyed, not led. You'd have looked to me for answers, instead of finding them yourselves." Blake's jaw clenched. "So what was I to you? Just an experiment?" She shook her head. "No, Blake. You were proof that leadership isn't about strength. It's about trust, and that's something you had to earn, not demand." He looked away, shame flickering across his face. Miller cleared his throat. "Commander Langford will take it from here." Then, with a hint of pride, he added quietly, "Welcome back, Mom." As he walked off, the team remained frozen. Sarah stood before them. The same face, the same steady gaze, but everything had changed. Ortiz was the first to speak. "Ma'am, why us? Why this way?" She looked around at them all. "Because the Navy isn't just testing your endurance. They're testing your ability to follow the right person, even when that person doesn't fit your expectations." Her words cut deeper than any reprimand. Blake's voice was quieter now. "You saved my life. I still don't know if I can forgive the lie, but I know I'd follow you in a fight." She gave a small, genuine nod. "That's all I ever needed to know." For the rest of the day, they worked under her command. Drills, tactical movement, and silent discipline. The transformation was visible. Every order carried weight. Every man moved sharper, prouder. By dusk, when they returned to the base, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The instructors didn't shout. The recruits didn't argue. They simply followed, not because of rank, but respect. That night, as the team sat around the fire pit, Sarah approached quietly. "Tomorrow," she said, "you'll face your final trial. No scripts, no safeties. You'll lead yourselves, but I'll be watching. This time as your commander." The men exchanged glances. None spoke, but every one of them understood what that meant. When she turned to leave, Blake called after her. "Ma'am?" She paused. He stood, saluting her for the first time. "We won't let you down." She returned the salute. "See that you don't." As she walked away under the pale glow of the floodlights, the team sat in stunned silence. The recruit they once mocked had become their measure of courage, strength, and truth. And though they didn't say it aloud, every man there knew the hardest part of their training had just begun. The night before the final mission was suffocatingly still. The air outside the barracks hung heavy with salt and heat, thick enough to taste. Most of the recruits couldn't sleep. They sat in silence, not talking, not laughing, just thinking. Everything had changed. Sarah Langford was no longer the rookie or the quiet one. She was Commander Langford, the decorated Navy SEAL officer who had been secretly evaluating them all along. Some, like Ortiz, admired her more than ever. Others, like Blake, wrestled with a quiet storm inside. Respect warred with resentment, pride with guilt. At 0400, the alarm sounded. The men rose instantly, hearts pounding. Sarah waited at the command tent, fully geared, face painted, rifle strapped across her chest. She looked every bit the leader she was, calm, lethal, precise. "Good morning, gentlemen," she began, her tone sharp yet steady. "Today is your final trial. You've trained for weeks, but this will be unlike any exercise before. No scripts, no instructors to save you. Real terrain, live fire, unpredictable conditions. Your mission: infiltrate an abandoned coastal facility, recover a stolen data drive, and extract before sunrise." The recruits exchanged glances. Real infiltration? Real rounds? Sarah continued, "What you don't know is when, or if, you'll be engaged. You will move as a single unit, under my command. Failure is not an option." Chief Miller, standing beside her, simply nodded. "This mission decides who graduates. Treat it like the real thing, because it might be." Her eyes swept across the men. "Gear up." Within 30 minutes, they were aboard a transport helicopter, the blades slicing the pre-dawn air. The rhythmic thumping drowned out every thought. Sarah sat near the door, headset on, eyes locked on the horizon. Blake sat across from her. For the first time since the reveal, their eyes met. He gave a small nod, not a salute, not surrender, but something closer to respect. She returned it wordlessly. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio. 1 minute out. Sarah stood, her voice crisp. "Team, remember your sectors. Check your corners. Cover each other's backs. This mission isn't about medals. It's about survival. Stay disciplined. Green light. Go." They rappelled down the ropes into cold mist, boots sinking into damp sand. The sound of the ocean was distant now, replaced by the eerie hum of wind through broken metal. The old facility loomed ahead, half swallowed by fog. Sarah motioned forward. "Stack up." They advanced through the perimeter fence, night vision lenses glowing faintly green. Each shadow seemed to breathe. Every creak of rusted steel made the pulse quicken. Inside, the building was a maze of empty corridors. They cleared room by room, communicating only through hand signals. Ortiz whispered through the comms, "Ma'am, heat signature up ahead. 1, maybe 2. Sarah's reply was instant. "Hold position. I'll take point." She slipped forward like smoke, her movements silent. The team watched as she rounded the corner and with 2 swift shots, neutralized the targets before they could raise their rifles. "Area clear," she whispered. The men stared. Her precision was terrifying, but it filled them with a strange confidence. They moved deeper, reaching the main control room. Blake and Ortiz secured the entrance, while Langford approached the terminal. "We've got it," she said, sliding the stolen drive into a waterproof case. "Time to exfil." But before they could move, the power flickered. A voice came over the facility's speakers, low and distorted. "Impressive, Commander Langford. But your test isn't over." Every gun turned upward. "What the hell?" Ortiz hissed. Sarah's blood went cold. "That's not part of the exercise." The doors slammed shut. Lockdown. Lights cut out completely, plunging them into total darkness. Gunfire erupted from the far hall. Not blanks, not training rounds. real steel tearing through metal and concrete. Contact left, Blake shouted. The team scattered, returning fire. Sparks flew as bullets tore across the room. Sarah dove behind a console, scanning the chaos. Defensive perimeter. Maintain fire discipline. Her voice was firm, even as rounds pinned inches from her head. She switched channels. Command, this is Langford. We are under real fire. Repeat, real hostiles on site. Request immediate extraction. No response. Just static. Guns jammed, she muttered. Ortiz yelled. Who are these guys? Mercenaries, she said grimly, watching their formations. Professional. Someone hijacked the operation. The realization hit like a punch. The test wasn't just a drill anymore. Someone out there had turned it into an assassination attempt. Sarah made a split-second decision. We're not waiting for evac. Blake, take point. Ortiz, rear guard. We move to the pier. Now. They fought their way through the corridors, smoke and dust choking the air. Grenades exploded behind them, lighting the hallway in flashes of orange and red. Halfway down, Blake stumbled. A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through fabric. Keep moving, she shouted, pulling him upright. He grimaced through the pain. You're bleeding, too. She wiped a streak of blood from her cheek. I'll live. They reached the exit, only to find the pier surrounded by shadows. Dozens of figures advancing. Ambush! Ortiz shouted again. Sarah crouched, scanning. We're outnumbered, but not outmatched. She pointed to a fuel drum near the dock. Ortiz, suppressing fire. Blake, get that line rigged. What line? He yelled. She fired back at the attackers. The one that'll blow the pier? Within seconds, they'd wired explosives to the mooring supports. Sarah's voice cut through the gunfire. On my mark. 3, 2, fire. The blast tore the pier apart, sending flames into the night sky. The shockwave threw several mercenaries into the water. The team sprinted toward the surviving boats. Sarah pushed Blake into one and covered their retreat, bullets slicing the air around her. Go, I'll cover you. Blake shouted, Not without you. But she was already firing, precise, unstoppable. Finally, when the last of the mercenaries fell silent, she turned, leaping into the boat as it sped away from the burning shoreline. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the roar of the engines and the crackle of distant fire. Sarah finally exhaled, lowering her rifle. Mission accomplished, she said quietly. Ortiz laughed weakly. If that was training, I don't want to know what real combat feels like. Blake looked at her, eyes steady. That wasn't training, was it? She shook her head. No, someone wanted to make sure none of us made it out. The realization settled heavy. This wasn't over, not even close. As dawn broke over the waves, Sarah turned toward the horizon, the wind whipping through her hair. We survived because we trusted each other, she said. That's what makes you SEALs. Remember that. Blake's voice softened. What now, Commander? Her gaze hardened. Now. We find out who did this. The sun rose over the smoldering coastline, painting the wreckage of the pier in pale gold. Smoke still twisted lazily into the sky, carrying with it the scent of burnt wood and gunpowder. Team 2 huddled in the boat, engines idling, faces tight with exhaustion and adrenaline. Sarah Langford sat at the helm, scanning the horizon, calculating the next move. The sabotage, the live ambush, and the unknown assailants. It was no accident. Whoever had orchestrated this had both access and intent, and they had tested her team under extreme pressure to see who would survive. Blake, still clutching his bandaged shoulder, broke the silence. So, Who's behind all this? And why? It doesn't make sense. Sarah shook her head. That's what we're about to find out. Someone inside our ranks knew about the exercises. They orchestrated the sabotage and ambush. Someone wanted to see if we'd fail. Or die, Ortiz muttered. Inside the Navy? Exactly, Sarah said grimly. Someone with clearance, access, and motive. It's a traitor among us, or at least someone in the chain of command who's gone rogue. The realization hit the team hard. Weeks of grueling training, physical torment, psychological pressure, it had all been manipulated. They hadn't just survived Hell Week. They had survived a covert test of loyalty and execution under duress. Sarah stood, signaling for silence. Listen up. We're going back in. But this time, it's not a drill. We're going to identify the threat, neutralize it, and secure the stolen intel. Are we clear? Blake's jaw tightened. We follow you. All the way. Ortiz nodded. Yeah. We've got your back, Commander. Sarah's eyes swept across the team. Good. Let's move. They approached the inland facility carefully, navigating through the misted shoreline. The smoke from the burning pier had obscured their initial movements, but now they had to rely solely on stealth, observation, and the trust they had built together. Inside the facility, Sarah's experience shone. She guided them through the maze-like corridors, pointing out ambush points, weak walls, and entry points. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture precise. Her team mirrored her actions, moving with newfound coordination, not as recruits, but as elite operatives. As they reached the control room where the stolen drive had been kept, Sarah froze. The door was ajar, and inside, light reflected off polished boots. Contact, she whispered. From the shadows stepped a figure familiar to all, Chief Miller himself, holding a briefcase with the drive. The team froze. Chief, what the hell? Ortiz breathed. Miller's expression was cold. Langford, you performed exactly as expected. Too well. But there are rules in this Navy that even you don't control. The exercise. The sabotage. It wasn't a test for your team. It was a test for you. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Explain. He opened the briefcase. Inside, the stolen drive gleamed. This data is classified beyond anything you've trained for. Whoever controls it controls operations worldwide. I needed to know if Team 2 could execute under real conditions, without instructions, without guidance, and still succeed. You've proven it. But the Navy doesn't trust just anyone. Not even you. Blake stepped forward, anger rising. So you set us up? You put live explosives, real threats, and us in harm's way to see if we'd make it? Miller nodded slowly. Sometimes the only way to know who's worthy is to break them. Sarah's hands clenched. You risked lives. You manipulated every aspect. This isn't leadership. It's arrogance. Miller's gaze was unflinching. It's survival. And your team proved that trust, loyalty, and execution matter more than brute strength. You've earned the right to command them fully, if you choose to accept it. Ortiz muttered. So it was all a test of her leadership? Blake shook his head, stunned. And we thought she was just some rookie. We've been following her all along, and she was in charge from day one. Sarah stepped forward, rifle raised slightly to signal readiness. This isn't about me, Chief. It's about my team. They followed me not because I'm a SEAL commander, but because they trusted me. That trust is earned, not manipulated. I won't allow it to be used as a pawn. Miller exhaled, a rare flicker of respect crossing his face. Very well. The data remains secure. Consider this your last assessment. You've passed. With that, he left the room, leaving Sarah and her team alone with the drive. Ortiz broke the silence. "So, we did it. We actually did it." Blake looked at Sarah, the tension in his body finally loosening. "You really were the commander. All along. And you saved us. More than once." Sarah lowered the rifle and nodded. "We saved each other. That's what being a SEAL is. You operate as one unit, no matter what obstacles lie ahead. Leadership is about service, not ego. Today, you've all earned your place." The team stared at her, the weight of respect and awe settling in. Later, as they exfiltrated under the early morning sun, the facility secure and the drive intact, Sarah addressed her team one final time. "This mission tested more than your skill or endurance. It tested your trust in each other, in me, and in your own judgment. From here on out, you are not recruits. You are Navy SEALs. And your actions today prove that you can face anything together." Ortiz grinned. "I thought I'd hate you for lying, but I get it now. You led us the only way that mattered." Blake nodded slowly. "Yeah, you weren't just in charge. You earned our trust." Sarah smiled faintly. "Good. Keep it. That's more valuable than any medal, rank, or recognition." As the team returned to base, the sun climbed higher, bathing them in light. The scars of the past weeks were visible, bruises, cuts, and dirt smeared across their uniforms, but beneath them lay something stronger, unbreakable trust, cohesion, and the knowledge that they had survived the ultimate test. That night, as the team sat together, gear cleaned and rifles secured, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of calm. She looked at each man, seeing the growth, the courage, the determination she had quietly guided from the shadows. The Navy had tested her, tested them, and in the process forged a bond stronger than any drill, any sabotage, any simulated ambush. In the quiet moments before sleep, Blake spoke softly. "You know, we really believed you were just a recruit." Sarah looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "And now?" "Now," he said, "you're the reason we made it through. Our SEAL commander. And the best damn one we could have had." Sarah nodded, knowing the mission, the deception, the tests, every agonizing, terrifying moment had led to this. They weren't just a team anymore. They were warriors, forged in trust, fire, and unyielding will. The waves outside whispered their approval as the night settled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, but tonight they were united. Not by orders, not by rank, but by respect, loyalty, and a shared understanding that the strongest leaders are often the ones you never see coming. And as they drifted into sleep, one truth lingered over them all. They had followed a recruit and emerged under the command of a legend. The story was over, but their journey, their bond, their legacy had only just begun.